Hey everyone, today we're going to do an update video for my endgame analysis spreadsheet. Today we're going to be going over legendary weapons, very highly requested recently. I was actually going to delay this video a little bit and make some more DPS update videos, but today we're going to be focusing on just legendary weapons. Don't really have time for, supers, subclasses, origin traits, perks, stuff like that. The video would be way too long. And while I know some of you guys like that stuff, I know a lot of you have found the very long format videos to be a little exhausting to watch. So we're just going to stick to legendary weapons. That should be long enough, maybe 15, 20, 25 minutes. Not sure how long this is going to run for. Not scripted today. Don't have slides, unfortunately. I mean, I could make slides for tier list update videos, but I think looking at the spreadsheet and just nice and big on the screen, especially for mobile users, I've zoomed in a lot here, should be visually stimulating enough to kind of go along with what I'm talking about. So with that aside, let's go ahead and get started. We have quite a few new weapons, this season, as of course it is the Edge of Fate launch. We have a new expansion with us. So yeah, I'm going to be going from left to right. I've actually alphabetically organized the weapon families in the bottom here. As you can see, autos are first, SMGs are last. A viewer asked me to do that, said it would probably be a good idea, so I did it. And then also on top of that, I've moved primaries in front of specials and heavy weapons because it didn't really make sense to have special, power, and then primaries. I just added them kind of over here because they were the last ammo type, I suppose, that I covered when it came to tier lists. So let's go ahead and get started with auto rifles. We have 4 new auto rifles this season. The first one is called Giver's Blessing. This one's a rapid fire kinetic auto, and the main draw here is you have rewind rounds, shoot to loot, and kinetic tremors. Now, if this thing had attrition orbs, I'd probably place it in the A tier, but lacking that little extra utility that a gun like Multimach has is unfortunately, gonna place it a little bit lower, it's at the top of B tier, because I really couldn't justify placing it over other B tier kinetic tremors autos like Chroma Rush and Origin Story, which had either better perks, but, like a worse archetype, or had, similar perks, but, maybe like a better origin trait or something like that. So I really couldn't justify putting Giver's Blessing in the A tier. However, I will say Kinetic Tremors is pretty underrated, especially on rapid fire autos. The effectiveness of the perk on larger targets is very good. The scaling on autos is pretty decent. So if you haven't given Giver's Blessing with Kinetic Tremors a try, I would strongly recommend it. A bit of a longer range option than Multimach with less orb generation, but still definitely a pretty cool option. Next, we have Intercalary. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. Intercalary, or maybe Intercalary. I don't know. One of them. It's going to be at the bottom of B tier from the raid. It is an adaptive auto rifle, so not the best archetype. And it is, to my knowledge, the first stasis auto rifle with headstone and some consistent damage perks to pair with it. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, not the best frame and not the best origin trait either. I would say Veiled Threat is probably a better headstone auto overall. Radial Area Transposer plus Attrition Orbs, pretty strong combo there. So Intercalary, unfortunately, I'm going to place it at the bottom of the B tier, but that's not to say it's like terrible or anything. I do think, though, it is probably the weakest weapon that was dropped from the raid. Some of the other raid weapons we're obviously going to cover in this video as well. A lot of people have been asking about those. Next up, we have Ahab Char. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Ahab Char I've actually placed in the C tier. So Ahab Char, the only bad thing about this auto I want to say is I do think Burning Ambition is pretty overrated. I'm kind of in the same way that a Rolling Storm is kind of overrated, right? Just requires too many hits for too little kind of positive gain. So I'm going to say Ahab Char, if it had Heal Clip and Incandescent instead of Burning Ambition, this would easily be maybe even like an A tier auto because it's a rapid fire, which is the best frame. It has Bray Legacy, which to my knowledge, Incandescent Scorch Ticks should trigger Bray Legacy. So pretty cool effects there, but unfortunately just does not have Incandescent. And so with Burning Ambition and kind of the other perks are not that interesting here either. With Heal Clip and Burning Ambition, I do think this auto is not particularly like the best, right? I'd probably put it near like the lower tier Incandescent autos like Amit. So I've gone ahead and I placed it into the C tier. And finally, the last auto we have to talk about today is Auric Disabler, right above it in the C tier as well. This is kind of like a splash plus damage option combination here. It's a precision strand auto, so not a great start. Strand, not the best energy for an auto rifle to have, just generally speaking. Kinetic slot tends to be weaker than the energy slot when it comes to primaries that we're talking about. And Strand is, because the perks that it comes with, even with the introduction of stuff like Slice and Tear, still not the greatest energy when it comes to utility and splash perks. So stuff like Hatchling, not super appealing. You could go something like Slice, Tear for that Strand, kind of synergy and utility. But overall, I would say compared to some of the stuff in the B tier, whether we're talking about a Chroma Rush or a Giver's Blessing, or some of the stuff in the A tier, whether we're talking about like a Summoner or an Abyss Defiant or a Pyroelectric, yeah, not even close really. So Auric Disabler, we're going to go ahead and place it in the C tier. Also, another thing, if you guys are looking for my justification on some of these weapon placements or a little brief description of my thoughts on the weapon, I've actually added these little notes on the right side. Now, please don't flame me if some of the notes toward the bottom get a little repetitive or a little boring or a little short or a little kind of just abrupt, because toward the bottom, nobody's really considering these autos down here, like Fire Fright, the number, you know, arc logic. Like, no one is really considering these autos for endgame content these days, so I didn't put too much effort into them. Also, you know, your eyes kind of glaze over once you've seen your third Feeding Frenzy auto in the same tier list. So once I got down here, it was quick and dirty, right? And some of the lower tier placements, they're not super exact in terms of their ranking, right? Maybe Lodbroxy could be above Arc Logic, right? So don't worry too much about the bottom tier stuff. Really, the top tier stuff is where I put most of my focus, for those of you wondering. So let me just get that out of the way. And yeah, let's go ahead. I've also, by the way, I've restructured a lot of these tier lists, and I moved some stuff in between tiers, and I haven't really put that in the changelog. So if you're curious, you know, some weapons have definitely moved, and you're not just like seeing things. Like, I've definitely looked at all the tier lists and maybe given them like a little bit of a second pass. I didn't look as closely as I possibly could have, because, you know, tight timelines and, you know, whatnot. But if you have any disagreements or you feel like a weapon is being underrepresented, you know, feel free to send me a message and I can definitely take a look at it. But the top tiers should be fairly accurate, I will say. Okay, moving on, we have bows. So bows, I believe we got 3 new / refreshed reprised bows. The first one is going to be pre-Astynix 4. This one I moved from the B tier to the A tier because this one actually now has double splash perks. You can go for something like Firefly Explosive Head or Firefly Burning Ambition, or you can go Incandescent Burning Ambition or Incandescent Explosive Head. So pretty solid frame. I would argue precision frames are still the best for PvE. Lightweights come in at a close second. Wildcard is a pretty good origin trait to have on really anything, but for an ad clear primary, it's one of the better ones you can get. So yeah, and I do think Burning Ambition, I believe it scales well on bows. And if you're getting kills constantly, like the number of hits that it requires to, you know, proc Burning Ambition is really not that bad. So I think pre-Astynix 4, you could see some explosive destruction in the same way that you might have seen with some people that made Tyranny videos, you know, talking about Dragonfly Incandescent. It's kind of in that same neighborhood, but I would argue slightly more equipped for endgame content than something like a Tyranny of Heaven. So I place it in the A tier, slightly above Tyranny. Next up, we have Fortunate Star. Fortunate Star was in the A tier before this solstice, and it's still in the A tier. It's not going to break S tier. However, this thing is pretty good, right? Vice Stinger, I believe it reduces your draw time once you trigger its RNG effect. And then you have Dragonfly destabilizing, which is good. Repulsor destabilizing. You might have noticed I put impromptu ammunition on a lot of these primary and special weapons that could potentially benefit from increased ammo generation. Apparently right now, impromptu ammunition is doing close to nothing right now. So, you know, I'm not going to recommend the perk. I put it at the bottom of a lot of these columns, but I put impromptu ammunition in these tier listings to suggest that it may be buffed into usability in the future, because right now I don't think it is working as intended. So I'm going to assume that it will be buffed in the future, and hopefully we'll see some more interesting stuff with that. So Fortunate Star, you also have Demoralize, your classic explosive head if that's something you want to pursue, but I do think Dragonfly destabilizing and Repulsor destabilizing are easily the strongest options here. Maybe a little improvement compared to the previous iteration, but I don't think it's as strong as something like a non-denouement in the S tier. Okay, moving on, we have our last bow, and that's going to be Mercury A, which you see right over here. This is the first member of a new frame called the High Impact Longbow frame. This one's interesting because it has attrition kinetic tremors, which triggers very, very quickly on bows. On bows with enhanced kinetic tremors, you only need 2 shots to trigger kinetic tremors. Now, is this thing, you know, is the high impact longbow, you know, the increased draw time going to be worth having attrition orbs over something like a precision accrued redemption with Archer's Tempo kinetic? I would argue no. High impact longbows, right now, their draw time is very awkward to use in PvE. I really favor bows that have faster, quicker, snappier draw times in PvE. So Mercury A, you know, it's not terrible or anything, and we're definitely going to do some more archetype analysis later on this season to kind of analyze how good it is when it comes to minor DPS. Maybe I've misjudged the bow a little bit, but in your moment-to-moment gameplay, I would say that long of a draw time is definitely not the greatest, I would say. So I decided to put it at the top of B tier. I think that makes the most sense to me right now, compared to some of these more consistent options, classic options that people have experimented with and have confirmed that are, you know, very strong splash options in the current sandbox. Okay, so that's it for bows. Let's go ahead and move on to hand cannons. So hand cannons, I believe we have 4 new hand cannons and the introduction of a new spread shot archetype, which we'll talk about in a future video when we go over the new archetypes and do a little bit of analysis on them. But right off the rip, we have a new member glowing in the S tier, and that's going to be Aureus Neutralizer from Trials of Osiris. So Aureus Neutralizer, not only does it pack Vorpal Cascade, which allows it to hit the highest single hand cannon Lucky Pants DPS in the game right now, and it's a legendary, it's not even an exotic, so pretty good. And it's also got Grave Robber 1-2 Punch, Grave Robber Trench Barrel should you choose to use it with melee builds. Spread shot hand cannons, like shotguns, you know, they really pack a punch if you're hip firing or just like shooting a target really close to you. So it can definitely cut through that kind of weakness of primaries that a lot of people feel when they're not running double special in higher tier content. So I think Aureus Neutralizer can be solid as a neutral option, and it's also very excellent when it comes to being best in slot for Lucky Pants damage as well. So Aureus Neutralizer, shout out to that. It's going to go in the bottom of S tier. I don't think its neutral play is nearly as strong as something like a Word of Crota right now, but it is deserving of being in the S tier because it is a little versatile, and obviously it is best in slot for damage-related stuff on Lucky Pants. Okay, next up we have Agape. Agape is going to be placed at the top of A tier, you can see here. It's a new heavy burst. Origin traits is pretty decent. It has kind of like Aureus, right? You have an option for neutral gameplay, which is like Heal Clip Firefly, Heal Clip Incandescent. Pretty classic options there. And then you also have Rewind Rounds Precision Instrument, which is pretty good. It is probably best in slot right now in the energy slot when it comes to burst Lucky Pants damage. So kind of like Aureus, it's similar story, right? It's a little versatile. Pretty good when it comes to neutral play, and also pretty good when it comes to kind of doing boss DPS as well if you need an energy slot hand cannon for Lucky Pants. And obviously the new tier 5 system with triple perks will allow you to get all of these perks together should you choose to use them. So you can only just have one hand cannon. You could even run Heal Clip Incandescent Firefly during your mechanics phase. And then when it comes to damage, you could swap to like Rewind Rounds Precision Instrument if you also have those perks on the same hand cannon. So pretty cool stuff. Let's go ahead and move on to Solemn Remembrance. Now Solemn Remembrance, when the season first came out, I believe I had this in the C tier. But I think now that it's been confirmed that Firefly, the detonation is a little bit more delayed compared to Dragonfly and actually blows up the headstone instantly, I think Solemn Remembrance has a lot more synergy. Now, it does have a couple things that are working against it. First of all, it is a 140 style hand cannon. So it has a damage profile of a 140 hand cannon, which is not the best archetype for PvE. Usually we're looking for heavy bursts, so like 257s, or a precision like a 180. But it is still pretty good, right? People do like using their 140s, even when they have 180 recoil. And Headstone Firefly, you know, you do need to be hitting like enemies that have crits. So if you're shooting stuff like Shanks, obviously neither of these perks will do anything for you. But for the most part, I think the hand cannon, it's provably useful in neutral content, and even in high level content, being able to kind of just have a nice splash effect off of a single crit kill is pretty nice. The only other thing I would say that's holding this thing back is, of course, the lack of the origin trait. You know, something like a Word of Crota has Curse Thrall, and that alone is like an extra perk, or maybe even a perk and a half, depending on how you view it, compared to something like a Headstone or a Firefly. So Solemn Remembrance, I think, compared to the hand cannons around it, is pretty solid. But yeah, obviously it's reliant on you hitting crits for both of its perks, but I think it supports itself well. You know, Firefly is also a reload perk. You know, I could be wrong about this hand cannon. Maybe I'm overrating it a little bit, but I do think it is maybe the most consistent ad clear kinetic hand cannon. I could be wrong about that, but I do think it is pretty good. I do think it is pretty good, and so I placed it into the A tier. Next up, we're going to scroll down a little bit to the B tier for, I believe, our last hand cannon, which was introduced this season, and that's going to be Fenutria Fera. Now, Fenutria Fera, Bungie has shown that spread shot hand cannons are pretty good when it comes to neutral play, also when it comes to DPS, so they've definitely developed a niche in the meta, and I don't think that it's necessarily like an unhealthy niche either. I think it's kind of like a welcome niche. Doesn't seem like particularly broken or unbalanced, right? I think there's still definitely room for the more ranged hand cannon options in the sandbox. Fenutria Fera, though, you know, for having Incandescent, it could probably have a couple better perks here and there that people might enjoy using over something like a Threat Detector or over something even like an Incandescent. So I think, you know, like I say in the notes here, solid damage profile, and it's a good show of the archetype's potential, but something like an Aureus Neutralizer kind of has both options, the best of both worlds. And Fenutria Fera is kind of designed to be like a mid-range option that people can enjoy, but doesn't necessarily have the best perks, you know, compared to something like a Mint Retrograde, which was the first member of its, you know, new frame, new archetype, and showed itself to be just absolutely incredible right out the gates with an amazing role. This is kind of meant to temper, I guess, your expectations until maybe a better ad clear spread shot hand cannon comes out. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier, and that's going to be it for hand cannons. So next up, we have pulse rifles. Speaking of pulse rifles, right, we have a pretty crazy glow up. I think there's only one other weapon that glowed up this hard with a refresh. And starting off, we're going to be talking about Stars in Shadow. So Stars in Shadow, this thing actually used to be in the F tier with its old version, because its old version is several years old now. I think like 3 or 4 years old now. Came out in Beyond Light, I believe. And so yeah, pretty old weapon. But now they've reintroduced it. It has Wildcard as its origin trait, which is, like I mentioned before, pretty good. And then now look at these perks: Heal Clip, Incandescent, Impromptu Ammunition, Burning Ambition. Mostly looking at the Heal Clip Incandescent here. Lots of good pulses these days have Heal Clip Incandescent. In fact, there's a whole legion of them here. Nullified, Jurassic Green, Adhortative, Darkest Before. They all have Heal Clip and Incandescent. So, what makes this one kind of the bottom of the pack? Well, unfortunately, to all these other pulse rifles, Stars in Shadow is a high impact. And sometimes archetype doesn't make that much of a difference in PvE, but high impact pulses are definitely lagging behind other pulse archetypes by a fair amount. They definitely feel more awkward to use at mid ranges, I would say, in PvE compared to your average pulse like a rapid or even like a heavy burst. So I would say high impacts are definitely punished for that, but the rest of its kit's pretty good, right? Heal Clip, Incandescent, Wildcard, pretty great stuff. Just unfortunately, kind of a bad frame. If it had a better frame and maybe like a slightly more powerful origin trait, we'd consider S or, top of A. But, it is what it is. Let's go ahead and move on to our other pulse rifle that came out this season, one of the lower tiered ones here. It's going to be D tier, and it's going to be Last Thursday. So Last Thursday, unfortunately, was born into the world as a Strand pulse rifle. And, like I mentioned, Strand is one of the, maybe one of the worst energies that a primary, when I say energy, I mean like affinity, that a primary can be created as, because the perks you have access to are just not that strong, right? You have Hatchling, which is just one of the weakest 3.0 splash perks. You have, Slice, which is situationally useful. And then you have, Tear, which is like okay, right? And Last Thursday only has access to one of those, right? Which is Hatchling. It's an adaptive frame, which is like an okay frame of pulse. The origin trait's all right, but really there's just nothing particularly amazing about this pulse, right? You're right next to Aisha's Care, which is also in the D tier, which is a heavy burst, better frame. Slice, I mean, you could argue is maybe better first column than what Last Thursday has, and then similar perks in the second column with a worse origin trait, right? So kind of makes sense that Last Thursday would kind of land itself in the D tier here. Nothing too crazy about this pulse. Pretty chill, nothing too crazy. Yeah, let's move on and talk about Scout Rifles. So Scout Rifles, we have a new entrant into the S tier here, and that's going to be Aisha's Embrace. So Aisha's Embrace has been refreshed a couple times now. I was hoping they would give it good void perks the last time they refreshed it. This time I think they did a better job. Now S tier might be overrating it a little bit because no repulsor is like, not the greatest, I suppose. But you do have Demoralize Destabilizing, which I'm personally kind of a fan of. I think that's a pretty cool option. You also have Shoot to Loot and Rapid Hit if you prefer more neutral or potentially some like a utility option with Shoot to Loot. The only thing bad about this Scout Rifle, I would say, beside it not having Repulsor, is the origin trait being Roar of Battle. Not a great origin trait for PvE, not particularly amazing. So if it had a better origin trait and it had Repulsor, I think it would definitely be like solidly S tier, and I wouldn't be so hesitant about it. But I've decided to put it in the S tier because, there's only one other really solid destabilizing round scout, and that's going to be Vouchsafe. And, Vouchsafe doesn't have a particularly great origin trait, not enhanceable either. So, it's kind of what it is. But yeah, Aisha's Embrace, maybe not deserving of being the S tier, to be honest. Maybe top of A would have been more appropriate. But I still think it's pretty strong. I still think it's pretty good. And Demoralize is pretty good on like a precision focused weapon, like a Scout Rifle, paired with some of these other perks. Okay, moving on, we have Jurisprudent, which is going to be in the B tier. Now, Jurisprudent, unfortunately, right, it does have Bray Legacy, which is a nice origin trait. It has Rhyme Stealer Headstone, has Rapid Hit Headstone, Enlightened Action, Explosive Payload. It's packed with basically most of the good perks that you would expect to see on a Stasis Scout Rifle. The only problem is that it's a high impact, right? And high impact is one of the worst frames of Scout, feeling-wise and raw minor DPS-wise. So not particularly impressed with that part of the Scout Rifle, so I decided to plop it in the B tier. I don't even think there's any Headstone Scouts in the A tier anyway, so it's in good company. There's a lot of Headstone Scouts, as you can see here. Very similar perk pools in the B tier, but yeah, high impact frame is definitely going to hold this thing back. But at least the combo, I would say, is definitely stronger than something like a Percy's D. Non-enhanced, same archetype, just like worse perk diversity, and I guess like a similarly good origin trait. Okay, next up, we have Sublimation, which is also in the B tier. Sublimation is going to be near to the top of the B tier. This thing has, Eddy Current, Volt Shot, has Explosive Payload, has Shoot to Loot as an option, another Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload Scout. So basically, you're just looking for neutral play at probably Eddy Current Volt Shot here. Again, the only problem with this is I believe there is a there is a Volt Shot Scout in the A tier. It's a lightweight, which is a better frame. Unfortunately, this is just a high impact, right? And high impacts, they don't feel as good. They fire slowly. You know, already talked about this. Went the whole 9 yards with it. So really just, you know, another B tier option. Pretty chill. A lot of B tier stuff. You're going to see it basically have decent perks, but like bad frame. You're going to see that in a lot of these tier lists. You know, something moves down a tier because it's just not a great frame, even though the perks are like pretty decent. Okay. So that's sublimation. I believe we are done talking about scout rifles. Let's go ahead and move on to sidearms. So sidearms here, I believe we have 2 sidearms to talk about, right? 2 sidearms to talk about. The first one is going to be forgiveness. Now, I actually have not written down over here in the changelog what forgiveness used to be. If I remember correctly, it was not very good because it did not have Volt Shot back then. And the perks they gave it were like, I don't know, adrenaline junkie and stuff. It was not good. Okay. So this thing's got a bit of a glow up. It's in the A tier now, right? I will say of a little note here, I guess, as someone who watches pretty much every weapon in the game progress and develop as they refresh them and as they make new weapons. Sidearms definitely have maybe some of the most room to grow when it comes to having the strongest S tier options, right? Because even something like a heliocentric or an insurmountable that you see in the S tier could definitely be improved upon, right? Like insurmountable could have a better, you know, frame, and heliocentric could also have a better frame and maybe a different origin trait. So unlike some of the other stuff like hand cannons, for example, where Word of Crota is very, very difficult to dethrone, I think sidearms do have, like, there's not a lot of crazy good options that are kind of crowded at the top here. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about our 2 sidearms. Forgiveness is the first one. They give it Volt Shot plus the options to have a damage perk as well, a consistent damage perk like Desperate Measures or Kill Clip, you know, kind of synergizes well with Volt Shot as well. So the only thing missing is kind of the origin trait. Heavy Burst is one of the best sidearm archetypes when it comes to raw minor DPS. So Forgiveness, I've placed it at the top of the A tier. Definitely makes an argument for itself over all of the other Volt Shot stuff below it, which is also in the A tier. Okay, next up we have Faustus Decline, or maybe it's Faustus Decline, one of them. Let's go ahead and take a look here. I placed it in the B tier. Now, I'm personally a big fan of lightweight sidearms. I really like how they feel, like heliocentric, for example. And I think it's pretty easy to hit crits with them, right? So Faustus Decline, definitely a solid headstone option if you want a headstone sidearm. It doesn't unfortunately have the double damage kind of, or splash plus damage, headstone plus desperate measures, or headstone plus frenzy that Peace Bond and Liminal Vigil have access to. So a little bit unfortunate there. But besides that, I'd say it's a very high quality of life, very good feeling headstone sidearm for those of you that want an option like that. So I placed it in the B tier, like a little bit below some of the stuff that has double damage perks, or, you know, splash plus damage perk. But yeah, pretty solid stuff. And obviously Bray Legacy is nothing to scoff at either. Bray Legacy is pretty cool. Okay, so that is it for sidearms. We're going to go ahead and talk about our last primary archetype here, or sorry, family, I should say, and that's going to be SMGs. Okay, so SMGs, I believe we have three SMGs to talk about. The first one is a new entrant into the S tier, the best solar SMG in the game, Yeartide Apex. So Yeartide Apex, oh, you know what I just realized? Man, I really should have made this video before Solstice ended, huh? Because you can't get Yeartide Apex anymore. That's okay. I'm sure a lot of you were farming for it anyway. Yeah, lightweight SMG, best frame, enhanceable, check. Heal clip, check. Attrition orbs, check. Demo, check. Incandescent, check. Chaos reshaped, check. And then for those of you that maybe want to use Burning Ambition for some niche stuff, that's also an option too. So this thing's got banger after banger after banger. The only thing it's really missing is the origin trait, right? The origin trait's not amazing. Dreamwork is okay in team settings and practically useless in solo settings. So if this thing had a better origin trait, maybe something like even like an Indomitability from the Recluse, or Gravity Well, or like a Dark Ether Reaper would be crazy, right? So I don't know, anything that would be like a slightly better origin trait. Obviously it's not possible because it's a Solstice weapon. They all have Dreamwork. But, you know, just saying, if it had a better origin trait, it would climb a little higher, I think. But regardless, pretty good stuff from Yeartide Apex. Very, very solid neutral SMG. And yeah, that's why it's going to be in the S tier. Okay, coming up next, we have an A tier SMG, and it's going to be another Jolting Feedback SMG to add to our little collection here. The only other Jolting Feedback SMG in the game previously was Noxious Vetiver, I believe, from the Revenant, right? From Revenant, this thing has Attritional Jolting Feedback, excellent perk combo, Dark Ether Reaper, absolute banger, but 600 RPM SMGs definitely feel, I would say, significantly worse than lightweights, you know, 900s adaptives. So Antidate, I've placed it a little bit higher. It also has the option to do a Splash plus Splash perk, Dragonfly plus Jolting Feedback. You can run Rewind plus Jolting Feedback. And on top of that, I didn't really mention it in the notes here, but this is also the highest DPS SMG in the game for legendaries. You can use Rewind rounds and Target Lock on Peacekeepers to achieve basically the highest legendary primary DPS that you can do in the game, as far as I'm aware. So pretty good stuff when it comes to Antidate there. Solid. Origin trait's not amazing, but like pretty decent. And yeah, so it's going to be placed in the middle of the A tier. And finally, we have our lovely little world drop, Quadnilus 2. Quadnilus 2, yeah, this thing is not good. It is an adaptive frame, which is fine archetype. And the origin trait's pretty decent, wild card. However, I did mention Strand, not too great, right? Slice on an SMG is pretty decent, especially if you're playing Hunter. But some of these other perks here, like Hatchling, pretty underwhelming. Dragonfly, not great on a spray type weapon like an SMG. And then Surrounded is a bit of an outdated perk when it comes to SMGs as well. So not particularly great. Gonna go ahead and place it in the D tier. You can see some of the SMGs below it and above it, and I think you kind of reason with yourself that kind of makes sense that it would be in the D tier. Okay, so we've come to the end of our primary stuff here. Let's go ahead and move on to specials. First, we're going to talk about Breech GLs. So Breech GLs, what do we got to talk about? First up, we have 2 new Breech GLs. Yes, that's 2. Theodolite and Festival Flight. Now, they're both going to be in the S tier. Theodolite is in the S tier because it is arguably better than Mountaintop for movement stuff, because Reconstruction allows you to get a 2 mag, whereas with Mountaintop, you need to use Overflow to get a 2 mag. So back-to-back could be potentially helpful. It's also in a different slot from Mountaintop, so I guess they don't really compete. But, you know, pretty interesting stuff. I would say it's also better for ad clear than Mountaintop if you want to use something like Volt Shot. It has access to Blast Distributor for build crafting. So yeah, Theodolite overall, I would say better weapon than Mountaintop. It's also got better damage perks for, you know, swap DPS if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, another S tier weapon for Theodolite. And then finally, all 4 area denials, as usual. They're in the S tier. They are some of the best when it comes to legendary special ad clear in the game, ammo efficiency, excellent stuff. Festival Flight in the S tier almost has every perk that you're really looking for on an area denial. Envious Arsenal for DPS stuff. The first one to have Blast Distributor for basically free grenade damage increase during DPS. You have Slice for Splash Sever application for like a day 1 and stuff like that. Honing for DPS, One for All for ad clear, Attrition Orbs for utility. The only thing really missing here is Dreamwork is not the best origin trait to have on an area denial, but still pretty amazing stuff. Shout out to Festival Flight, big fan, put in the S tier. Let's go ahead and move on to the Fusion Rifle tier list. Fusion Rifles, I believe we have 2 new Fusion Rifles this season. The first one is going to be Finite Maybe from the Desert Perpetual raid. We have been missing actually a good energy slot Fusion Rifle for a long time actually. Remember, we got Riptide and we got Scatter Signal, and now we have Lionfish before Cartesian was really fully replaced, right? Because Techie and Force, great, but it's an adaptive frame instead of a rapid. Zealot's Reward, pretty good, but you don't have, you know, Reconstruction, you don't have rewind rounds, you have autoloading. You have autoloading, and autoloading is a bit awkward to use with Controlled Burst, right? Because you're definitely missing Controlled Burst procs on one part of your mag for multiple mags, right? So, you know, Zealot's Reward always had an asterisk next to it. Finite Maybe kind of attempts to solve that issue because it has Reconstruction, Controlled Burst, and Bait and Switch. And it has Discord Incandescent, which is arguably the best perk pairing to have on a kind of ad clear fusion. Aggressive fusions also, if you guys are not aware, have increased minor scaling compared to normal archetypes of fusions. So this thing is definitely like usable for ad clear. I would say one of the best Discord specials in the game right now. So that's also potentially interesting. The only problem is aggressives having used a Reconstruction bait, aggressive Finite Maybe for DPS. I can tell you right now, while they are similar in DPS when it comes to just damage profile against rapid fires, their total damage is a little bit better. Their DPS is kind of similar. The only issue is that aggressives, the horizontal spread definitely is noticeable. It's definitely noticeable. If a boss is stomping you or a boss isn't really large, you're definitely going to miss some of those bolts. And so that kind of stops me from putting Finite Maybe any higher. It also lacks kind of the, you know, chill clip utility, I guess, that Lionfish has, but you can argue Discord Incandescent is pretty useful too. So yeah, Finite Maybe, because of its combination of being pretty solid for damage in most cases and a novel kind of utility ad clear option, I place it in the S tier. Okay, and you know, not really a spoiler here, but I'm sure you expected this. Lionfish is now top of the S tier, so I kicked out Riptide from the S tier. Lionfish is its new replacement, and Lionfish really just does it all, right? It has Reconstruction, it has a Let from Gold swap, it has Chill Clip for champ related stuff or just freezing a target. It has Controlled Burst, which is, you know, excellent for just consistent DPS. And then if you really want to optimize as the Tractor user, you can use Elemental Honing, and Stasis is definitely one of the better elements to make use of Elemental Honing. Problem Solver is also great. Problem Solver is also great for exhausting targets that you're doing damage to, and Lionfish is really the type of weapon that you'd probably be using on a boss level or mini boss level target. So Lionfish, best fusion in the game? I would agree. S tier, rank 1, blah, blah, blah. You know how it is. Scatter Signal, Overflow Controlled Burst, still pretty classic, right? And Slice can be useful in contest content if you're like the Tractor user. So you know, I still put it in the S tier, you know, and it's the fact that it's a rapid and it's kind of a more consistent option, which is generally what you're looking for as a fusion rifle user, especially in endgame content. Makes me put it a little bit over finite maybe. But yeah, that's what my S tier is looking like right now for fusion rifles. I don't believe we have any more fusions. So let's go ahead and move on to shotguns. Actually, I'll give you a little peek of the Glaive tier list. You can look at this yourself. I've kind of compressed Glaives because my opinions of Glaives have kind of shifted over time. I really do believe that Glaives are one of those weapons where even a B tier Glaive, like a bottom tier Glaive, which you may not agree with some of these placements, but even a bottom tier Glaive is really going to do a similar job to like an S tier Glaive. The difference in functionality between the top Glaives and the bottom Glaives in this game is really not that major. Almost every Glaive in the game, pretty much every Glaive in the game, has some sort of reload assist, so your block uptime will be high. It's really just going to be the S tier Glaives bring something special to the table, whether it's chill clip or chaos reshape or extrovert or slice. The S tier Glaives bring something different to the table that you wouldn't expect from a Glaive, or just that little extra oomph, right? The A tier stuff is just really solid stuff, or maybe some potentially useful niche, you know, maybe a very high quality of life. And then B tier is just maybe a little lacking, right? Maybe a little lacking. But you know, no insult to the B tier Glaives. You know, most Glaives, or not really most, all Glaives can really do the job of a Glaive in endgame content, which is why I thought it was a little harsh to segment the Glaive tier list into more than just 3 tiers. I think these 3 groups are fairly accurate, in my opinion. Okay, next up, we have shotguns. So shotguns, no new Glaives this season, but we do have a couple new shotguns. We have Pure Recollection, Precipio, and Trachiness. So Pure Recollection is going to be the highest placing one. I've gone ahead and placed it in the A tier. Now, this might even be overrating it, to be honest. I do think heavy burst shotguns, like I've mentioned in streams before, kind of struggle to find a place in the sandbox to live. But I will say, Envious Arsenal, definitely a big help on heavy burst shotguns. Manually reloading and needing a reload assist is one of the heavy burst shotgun's biggest weaknesses. So Envious Arsenal being coverage for that's something like an Arcane Embrace doesn't have access to outside of Grave Robber. Definitely a big help. High Impact Reserves, a bit quirky as well, you know, kind of like a double damage perk situation going on, even though High Impact Reserves is not necessarily the best damage perk to have in the first column. And then you have stuff like Bait and Switch, which is more consistent than something like a PI or a Surrounded on Arcane Embrace. And then you have Withering Gaze as well. I think the Withering Gaze is really what sold me when it comes to putting this heavy burst in the A tier compared to something like Arcane Embrace. I do think having a hit scan, close range, damage viable option that surge matches something like Tractor is potentially helpful. And I do not like, you know, Withering Gaze Wilderflight as much, or Withering Gaze, you know, Lotus Eater as much. So I think a hit scan, close range, solid, consistent weapon is definitely a nice option to have for Withering Gaze. I think people are going to prefer it over stuff like, you know, fusions for Withering Gaze in some cases. So that's what kind of made me put it maybe closer to the A tier rather than the B tier, and, you know, closer to where Arcane Embrace is. So yeah, Pure Recollection, cool stuff. Also, this is the heavy burst slug, the shotgun people are going to be using to die instantly in speedrunning. You'll probably see that in the future because I believe this thing rolls ricochet as well. Next up, we have Precipio. So you got to scroll down a little bit. You'll notice in the B tier, there's lots of just 1-2 punch shotguns that are missing something, right? Either it's a bad frame, so it's a precision frame, it's missing like a reload perk, it's, you know, not a great origin trait or something like that. I mean, that probably wouldn't swing the balance too much. But yeah, A tier, you see a lot of solid 1-2 punch shotguns that have some level of versatility where they're really, really great. And then B tier, you know, there's something missing. And Precipio, the thing it's missing is a good reload perk, because it 1-2 punches in the first column. The second column doesn't really have any good reload perks. And then the cool thing it has, I suppose, is 1-2 punch plus Vorpal. That's kind of an option. But compared to something like a Prophet of Doom, no Recon 1-2 punch, no Envious 1-2 punch, no Pugilist 1-2 punch. So a little bit interesting, I suppose, because it's double damage perk. But if you really want to go double damage perk quirky, you can scroll up and you can use a Sudden Death, right? You can use a Sudden Death with 1-2 punch Trench Barrel. That's a better option. Precipio, not the greatest, and Precision Frame is the worst frame of shotgun in the game. So I decided to just place it in the B tier with the other 1-2 punch alternative type shotguns. Next up, we have Trachiness. Okay, so Trachiness, gonna be released pretty soon. Rapid Fire Slug, new slug archetype. Now, the only problem I have with Trachiness is, number one, I've talked about this on stream, but the Rapid Fire Slug is really gonna struggle to find a home in today's economy. Either they need to make it better than the current like slugs in the game, which would just be straight power creep, which I doubt they're gonna do, right? But they're likely going to make it higher DPS than a regular pinpoint slug, but lower damage per shot. That's typically how rapid fire frames function compared to normal lower fire rate guns, right? The only problem with this is that slugs are valued for their damage per shot. And Trachiness, you know, having lower damage per shot, it's going to decrease its value because slugs are not really valued for, you know, being able to shoot fast. That's what the heavy burst is for, right? So it's going to kind of find this weird sandwich zone between heavy bursts, which shoot faster and have higher DPS, versus, you know, pinpoint slug. So if they make it have higher DPS than a heavy burst, then maybe Rapid Slugs will just straight power creep Heavy Burst and Heavy Burst will be useless. I really don't know what Bungie's going to do to balance this archetype effectively, but I have a feeling it's just not going to work out very well. So that on top of the fact that Trackiness has basically no relevant PvE perks besides Lead from Gold and Chill Clip, you know, having a Chill Clip shotgun, I think as a speedrunner that likes kind of niche options that are cool quality of life micro optimizations, I'd probably farm for one. Sure, I get a Trackiness, why not? But in terms of like a regular endgame player doing regular endgame content, there is basically zero reason for you to get this over a Tanasha. And so because it's so niche and because the archetype is definitely a question mark, I kind of have to place it at the top of the C tier. You'll see a lot of the C tier weapons are like also just like niche weird things like Someday and Sojourner's Tale, or just outdated like, you know, artifacts from a different time like Retrofuturist where, you know, lightweight swapping was more relevant. So I think C tier is a fair placement for it. Might move up or down depending on what we find out about the rapid fire slug frame. But even if we find out more, you know, it doesn't really have any usable damage perks. So its successors will probably have higher placements on this list. Okay, so that is it for shotguns. Let's go ahead and move on to snipers. Okay, so snipers, we have 2 new snipers this season. Number 1 is going to be Lance Ephemeral. So Lance Ephemeral is actually what made me decide to kick Supremacy out of the S tier, because it and Praetor's Revenge are simply the best snipers in the game. I do think Praetor's Revenge has a slight edge because I do think Time Loss Magazine and just mag dumping is a better identity for snipers to have than a burst option, because Lance Ephemeral is a bit more of a specialist option compared to Praetor's. It has access to redirection, it has access to frame of reference, both of which are bursty perks, but those are not really the types of perks and the type of identity that snipers have taken on in the damage sandbox today. So I think Lance Ephemeral is a little bit worse than Praetor's. It does have a lead from gold swap, which can definitely be nice, definitely appealing, but I don't think it's as good as Praetor's, and of course you can lead from gold swap on a different special and then just swap to Praetor's, right? So I do think Praetor's is better overall. Time Loss Magazine, definitely the better origin trait when it comes to just raw, straight DPS dumping if you need to use a sniper dump on day 1. And it does have kinetic tremors as well, which I think is super nice for neutral play. Just a great weapon overall. And yeah, Lance Ephemeral, nothing against it really, but it's just not as good as Praetor's in that regard. But still, the big thing about S tier is 4 times a charm plus viable, useful damage perks, right? Which is like bait and switch, honing, excellent stuff. Best ammo economy in the game, that's going to be Praetor's and Lance Ephemeral. If you look down a little bit, you'll see Omniscient Eye with 4 times PI. PI is definitely less consistent. 4 times Fury on Eichel SSR. You can kind of see the difference as to why these snipers are in the S tier versus the other rapids that are in the A tier. Now, the other sniper that I want to cover besides Lance Ephemeral is going to be Shoreline Dissident. Now, Shoreline Dissident, I think people were saying maybe I was a little bit too harsh on Shoreline Dissident. I've decided to place it in the B tier. I think that's a fair placement for it. It doesn't have access to 4 times a charm, which is kind of the expected perk that rapid fire should have to be good in the sandbox. So definitely gated out of S tier. When it comes to the A tier, you're seeing pretty much every single rapid have access to 4 times a charm, or at least be very utility based like Supremacy, where you have something like lead from gold kinetic tremors. So I would say, you know, definitely a swing and a miss compared to, you know, the FTTC snipers in the A tier. Now, what about the other stuff? You have stuff like shoot to loot, destabilizing rounds for like solo GK, cool solo GK roll you can get. And then you have triple tap PI, which is like triple tap PI, in my opinion, definitely worse combo than triple tap Focus Fury. Focus Fury, much more consistent damage perk. I think very underrated damage perk, to be honest, on some of these lower tier weapons. It's basically guaranteed 20% once you hit 3 or 4 shots for the rest of DPS, right? Unlike PI, where it's like every time you reload, you reset your stacks. You don't reset at all, right? As long as you are shooting consistently, you never reset, right? You never ever reset. Even if you miss, even if you stow, even if you like hit a body, you never reset, right? So Focus Fury, pretty nice stuff. And Psycho Hack's pretty good too. Psycho Hack's a pretty good origin trait, even if it's been kind of power crept by Problem Solver, right? So Shoreline Dissident, you know, it's one of the better Void snipers in the game right now when it comes to DPS, but we're definitely missing like a 4 times a charm bait or a 4 times a charm honing Void sniper. That would easily like go straight into the S tier or the top of A tier. You know, definitely better than something like a Shoreline Dissident. So Portal playlist stuff, you know, not particularly amazing, but nothing that I didn't really like expect from this sniper. Okay, next up we have Rocket Sidearms. So Rocket Sidearms I've also changed. I believe I used to have a B tier. Now it's just S and A tier. I think it's pretty clear that there's 2 groups of Rocket Sidearms, right? You have the S tier and you have the A tier. Indebted Kindness, still pretty good, but I would say a little bit more niche compared to something like a Return Memory. Volt Shot is fine. It's a good Volt Shot user. But, you know, no enhanced lead from gold. Impulse Amplifier is pretty good, but, you know, you don't have ammo gen perks like, you know, field prep or air trigger, stuff like that, right? So can't really make an argument for it being like a solid S tier contender. And then the call is very high utility. It has dealer's choice. It has slice, great user of slice, you know, desperate measures, but it really lacks that, you know, that oomph, that punch, that Incandescent has, or like an air trigger chill clip roll has, or like a repulsor destabilizing roll. You know, these kind of rolls, the call is kind of missing it a little bit, right? So not to hate on the call and Indebted Kindness or anything like that. They're just a little bit, I would say, a cut below in terms of general usefulness compared to something like, you know, a Lotus Eater or a Return Memory, which is, by the way, as you noticed, is the only new rocket sidearm, taking the top spot. Wildcard, you could argue, scales better into endgame content than Radiolaria because you only need 1 kill as opposed to 3. You have stuff like Impromptu, you have Lead from Gold, which Aberrant is notably missing. You have Redirection, which I think some people have been talking about. I personally am not a big fan of Redirection. I think Incandescent is better. But yeah, Return Memory has something for everyone. Really great stuff. Only thing it's missing really is the Field Prep Ammo Gen Boost, which Aberrant has access to. So that's why I actually still have Aberrant in the S tier, because Field Prep Incandescent could be pretty useful on like a day one to generate ammo in your energy slot if you don't want to use something like an Air Trigger Tanasha. Okay, next up we have Traces. Now Traces I've also been a little bit more forgiving with this season. I've actually decreased the amount of tiers to 3 tiers. We have the S tier, which is the excellent shoot to loot stuff. Chronophage with like shoot to loot, destabilizing, and Radiolaria. Also has repulsor access. Unsworn with subjugation, insane origin trait. Shoot to loot, detonator beam, hatchling, tear, blah blah blah. You know the drill. Best kinetic slot trace rifle by far, right? Then you have the A tier stuff, which is either shoot to loot with a pretty good trait in the second column, like, you know, incandescent, volt shot, stuff like that. Pretty good still, right? Shoot to loot perks. And then you have Incisor, which is like the only slice trace in the game, which I think is potentially useful to like swap to, you know, briefly just sever something and swap off. I've definitely seen people use this trace for that method. So, you know, potentially more usable in like niche endgame scenarios. And then you have your B tier stuff, right? You have your lead from gold, you know, trace swap for just kind of vacuuming stuff on enhanced lead from gold. You have some add clear stuff, which is like, in my opinion, not very appealing, which is why it's in the bottom tier. And then Ribbon Tail, which has just been added, right? This thing, perks are not that good, but in my opinion, all the traces down here, they're like similarly viable in endgame content. You pick the trace because maybe it has some add clear perks or something like that, but really none of this holds a candle to the stuff in the S or the A tier. Like really the B tier here would be like more like a C tier, and there would be a gap between the A and the C tier. But you know, it is what it is. I'm just gonna structure the tier list like this. I think all of these traces have the same level of appeal, in my opinion, with Hollow Denial maybe taking a little bit of a front seat here because it has access to lead from gold, unlike any other trace as far as I'm aware. Okay, so that's it for special weapons. Power weapons, we actually didn't get that many of them this season, so not going to be too much to cover here. Heavy GLs, not a surprise here. Outrageous Fortune in the S tier. This thing has the biggest glow up of any weapon on this tier list that we've talked about today. Actually used to be an F tier weapon. F tier, and the reprise, the refresh, pushed it up to S tier. From the bottom tier all the way up to the S tier. Pretty impressive stuff from Outrageous Fortune, but no surprise, right? Rapid fire frame, better of the 2 frames. Envious Arsenal, and you have Incandescent Explosive Light or Incandescent Chain if that's what you're interested in. But you have Envious Arsenal, Bait and Switch, Problem Solver to exhaust bosses. Pretty nice. Pretty much solid all around. Great for damage, right? Obviously not as good as something like a VS Chill. VS Chill may be worse origin trait for damage, but you have stuff like Cascade Point in the first column. You have Surrounded, which Outrageous Fortune does not have access to. So yeah, VS Chill Inhibitor, a little bit better when it comes to perk diversity and you know, burst specialization, but Outrageous Fortune still very good. Definitely a step above Bittersweet, Wicked Sister, etc. Okay. Next up, we have linear fusion rifles. We got the Boom Slang. Linears, honestly, there's not a lot of diversity when it comes to like the top options. You really just have Scintillation dominating at the top here with the Rewind rounds and Bait and Switch, and Vice Stinger, basically the 3 best things you could get on a linear. Maybe Vice Stinger, you'd want to trade it out for something like, I don't know, Nanotech Tracer or something, but really for the most part, linears are kind of set in stone. Scintillation's just the best one. Boom Slang, it has Envious Arsenal, which, you know, you could use for swapping and stuff, but Precision Instrument, not the greatest on a linear, right? It does reset pretty quickly, you know, and linears, you don't really get the opportunity to stack as much as you could on some other weapon types. So really, you know, the Precision Instruments, it's going to even out to be a lot worse than something like a Bait and Switch or, you know, a more traditional damage perk like Honing, right? So Boom Slang going to go top of the A tier, a little bit better than Doom Petitioner, you know, like similar perks, but Vice Stinger is definitely better, and Envious Arsenal, I would argue, is definitely better than Envious Assassin, and a little bit better than Reconstruction as well. So yeah, that's the state of linears. Pretty chill. Let's go ahead and move on to machine guns. Machine guns, we have, I believe, two new machine guns. The first one is Ulterior Observation. Now you'll notice something about the machine gun tier list, one of the heavy tier lists that I restructured the most, okay? So Commemoration is not in the S tier anymore, right? A lot of people love Commemoration. It's a classic. Reconstruction killing tally, Subsistence killing tally, Ray Inheritance. People love this machine gun, but I'm not gonna lie to you. Read the note. Solid neutral combos, but nothing special. The stuff in the S tier has something special, right? Corrective Measure, excellent origin trait for both neutral and for the overfill effect. You have double splash perks, you have splash plus damage, excellent stuff, unique perk combos. Ulterior Observation, aggressive frame, good frame, exhaustive research, pretty good origin trait. You have access to demo plus neutral perks, and you have access to headstone plus splash perk, right? So pretty good in that regard. Promemoria, dealer's choice, excellent origin trait, great for super gen. You have demo plus a bunch of neutral perks. Just like, I would say in my opinion, now this might be controversial, but I do think Promemoria is a better build blind, subclass blind, just neutral, raw, bare bones machine gun than Commemoration. That might be a hot take. I might be in hot water because of that, but I honestly do think so. I think Dealer's Choice is a little bit better than Bray Inheritance, especially on a machine gun, where Bray Inheritance is like kind of unnoticeable. I would say Demo is very, very treasured in the first column when it comes to machine guns, something Commemoration doesn't have access to. And then you have solid, kind of comparable, a second column, right? And then Promemoria, arguably aggressive frame is a better frame than adaptive for just endgame PvE. So Promemoria, gonna go ahead and put in the S tier, and then Song of Iryu. A lot of you have been asking me, why is Song of Iryu in the S tier? Cursed Thrall, guys. Cursed Thrall, especially with the prevalence of melee builds right now. Even on Warlock, I run Song of Iryu with Cursed Thrall, and I intentionally activate it. And Cursed Thrall is basically just an extra splash damage perk. It is better than basically everything else that every other machine gun has on this list. So Cursed Thrall is excellent. And then on top of that, you have Adaptive Frame, pretty good. Access to Adept Mag because it has Adepts, right? And then you have Demo and Reconstruction in the first column, great neutral. And then you have High Ground, which is, I would say, an underrated neutral perk. And then you can also use Bait and Switch as well. So really, Song of Iryu's only weakness is maybe the second. You could have, you know, some splash perks. Like if it wasn't Arc, if it was Void, for example, and had Demo Destabilizing Rounds, I would glaze this thing even harder. But Song of Iryu, in my opinion, very, very strong neutral. Even if you're not building strictly into melee, still very, very good machine gun. I would say it's time to leave Commemoration behind a little bit. Obviously, Commemoration, still a big fan, right? But it's not a very splashy machine gun, you know? The origin trait, not as good as Cursed Thrall, nowhere near as good as Cursed Thrall, no demo in the first column, and no splashy, like, you know, destabilizing rounds or, you know, demoralize, you know, this kind of thing in the second column here. So that's all I have to say about machine guns. If you couldn't tell, Ulterior Observation, we just talked about it. The second machine gun that we're going to talk about, though, is Unwavering Duty. Unwavering Duty, I've decided to go ahead and place it in the A tier. It does have Incandescent, and it does have Burning Ambition actually in the second column, which I've excluded here. I do think Burning Ambition is not very good on machine guns, in my opinion, at least. I could be wrong about this, but you know, when you're killing ads as quickly as you are, and Incandescent is triggering as often as it is on a machine gun, I really don't think Burning Ambition really does much to the gun. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think the number of hits that it takes to trigger Burning Ambition on a target, not really worth. And then of course, you know, Incandescent being in the first column means you're giving up your reload perk. And something common of all the S tier machine guns is they all have demo access, right? They all have reload options for no matter what build you're using. So I mean, you could take auto loading and like killing tally, and that would be like a solid, just decent neutral. But you know, Unwavering Duty, archetype's fine, origin trait's not that great. It just doesn't sell. It just doesn't sell itself as much as, you know, the stuff in the S tier when it comes to just raw consistency or kind of splashy effects that some of the high A tier and low S tier stuff has access to. Okay, most of this stuff is done. We have 3 tabs left to go. Let's briefly talk about rockets. Now, to no one's surprise, the When and Where is going to be in the S tier. Now, you might be surprised. Why is the When and Where not rank 1? Why is Hesed Vengeance rank 1? In my opinion, the When and Where is more of a speedrunner specialist, over-optimized, hyper-optimized tool where you have access to activate frame of reference, because otherwise, if you're not getting kills and reloading and stowing your rocket during like a day 1 or something, frame of reference is basically useless. And when you're comparing it to the absolute behemoth that Time Loss Magazine is, which is useful no matter really what you're using the rocket for, right? It's just absolutely insane perk, insane origin trait, I should say. It just doesn't compare, right? And then when you compare the perks, right? The When and Where does not have access to Envious Arsenal, one of the most important perks for consistent damage on any class, right? Clown Cartridge requires manual reloads. Reconstruction requires you to basically be doing a rotation, to be wasting your time, not wasting your time, but using your time when you're off the rocket doing something else. And then Overflow is situational, right? So, and then Reaper's Tide being like the specialist perk on the When and Where, you know, no access to Cluster Bomb in the first column. It just doesn't sell as much when it comes to normal endgame PvE content compared to Hesed Vengeance. So it is still very good. It is definitely still a step above Cold Comfort, Cynosure, you know, Tomorrow's Answer for sure, which is why it's in the S tier. But again, in the notes, missing Envious, but great otherwise as a burst specialist. It's a specialist rocket, right? So that's my opinion on the When and Where. Also, it's an adaptive frame, so slightly worse frame than Hesed as well. Hesed is just like the perfect rocket, bro. I don't know how they're power creeping Hesed. I don't know, bro. Give us like double bait and switch or something on a rocket. Maybe then we'll talk. Okay, so that's it for rockets. Let's go ahead and talk about swords. We'll talk about a couple of the stuff in the other tab that I've made because people have been asking about that. Swords, I've also entirely restructured this tier list, or at least the top half of the tier list. You'll notice Falling Guillotine is not in the S tier anymore. I got so many confused DMs and comments asking me, why is Falling Guillotine in the S tier? Should I be farming for Falling Guillotine? You put it in the S tier at the top. You know, I put it there because it combines Eager Edge and usable sword damage, right? But I realized I should be valuing Eager Edge less in these lists, right? Just personally. And also, don't use Falling Guillotine for damage. Just don't use Falling Guillotine for damage. The heavy attack is horrible. Vortex frames are just not good for damage. And the left click is definitely contested these days when it comes to DPS. There are other swords that I would recommend like left click spam. So in my opinion, Falling Guillotine, we'll put a lid on it. It's not an S tier anymore. The 3 swords that are now in the S tier, though, one of them is a new one, Synancia, right? This is the rank 1 sword. And the reason why I put it here is because look at the thing's charge rate, 50 charge rate, way above the norm. Bungie is slowly power creeping swords, by the way, and this is something I haven't really talked about that much on this channel, but Bungie is slowly power creeping swords by giving them 2 more impact than most swords. You'll notice here, if you scroll down, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, 60, different archetypes, 60, 60, 60, 60, blah, 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 60, 60, and then you get up here, and you notice, wait, Geodetic HSM has 62 impact. Oh, Aurora Dawn has 62 impact. Synancia has 62 impact, right? So this is basically, I believe, the equivalent of basically putting on like an Adept Impact mod or something like that. So a little bit more damage. But when it comes to swords, swords are some of the most uniform heavy weapons in the game. They're some of the least diversity, right? I mean, look at these sword rolls. Look at these perk pools. Relentless, surrounded, roll, blah, blah, blah. It's the same perks over and over, right? So even just that 2 impact can really set you above the rest of the pack, right? And then when you couple that, when it's, you know, a new waveframe archetype, you know, relatively new waveframe archetype, you have 50 charge rate. By the way, 50 charge rate is enough where if you have like 1 or 2 loosened blades, or you have some sort of charge rate booster, you can right click spam with this thing. You don't need a left click. You just right click spam with this thing. It's crazy. So, you know, high charge rate, and then solid origin trait and tenacity. You have great perks across the board. You have Eager Edge on a new gear weapon. A lot of people have been waiting for this so that they can wear, you know, an Eager Edge sword in their avant-garde activities and stuff like that. So yeah, and then you have the new perk, Sharp Harvest, could be used in some sort of special rotation. You have access to consistent damage perks and elemental honing. Aurora Dawn, which we haven't really talked about, you know, as we talked about Synancia just now. Aurora Dawn has access to flash counter cold steel, and the flash counter kind of reflections, the kind of splashy wave that it does, triggers cold steel, by the way, and it triggers the heavy version of cold steel, not the light version. So you get 60 slow stacks. So you can block in front of a target, immediately get it to 60 slow, left click it once, boom, it's instantly frozen, right? So I thought, you know, cold steel was kind of a cope perk back then, but flash counter uses no ammo. It uses no ammo. So if you want to use a sword, and then you can swap this sword to elemental honing and not lose any ammo, right? So you can swap it to Sharp Harvest elemental honing, and you could potentially use this for damage in like a contest level scenario. And then during mechanics, if you're doing sword damage, right, during mechanics, you can swap it to flash counter cold steel and have a legitimate defensive tool, even outside of stuff like Stronghold. So again, Glaives aside, Aurora Dawn, pretty good, A tier, right? It's missing Relentless, so I didn't put in the S tier. It's missing Eager Edge, didn't put in the S tier. Stuff in the S tier has to be truly either very versatile or a class of its own when it comes to damage, or just like Slammer, right? Slammer is just a very high utility Eager Edge sword that everyone uses for everything. So Slammer is just, you know, best in slot for that sort of stuff. But I didn't put it at rank 1, right? Synancia, it's got Eager Edge. By the way, if you're wondering how Eager Edge heavy attacks look on a waveframe, they're not good. Don't use them, okay? But we're going to use it for the left clicks, just for roaming around when you don't have a well or you're not on stasis on Hunter, right? Just for roaming around. Synancia, very versatile. Bequest, 70 impact. By the way, if we're talking about impact inflation, don't know why they gave Bequest 70 impact, but it has 70 impact, and that is why it is one of the best DPS swords in the game. So when it comes to surrounded DPS, nothing can touch it. Nothing can touch it unless they make like double damage perk swords at some point that are not Falling Guillotine, and then Slammer we already talked about. Okay, so that's it for swords. A little bit passionate there, but yeah, I did redo some of the top tiers here. You'll notice in the A tier, you know, you have stuff like consistent casters. You have Eager Edge mixed with like a unique damage perk like Surrounded, you know, some more casters, you know, lightweights. I kind of rated a bit more highly because of some recent testing that I did for the realistic video last season. We have, you know, Crown Splitters here as well. You know, just more endgame focused kind of reasoning when it comes to swords. If you have any questions about, you know, again, tier restructuring, please feel free to ask me, but hopefully this note stuff will clear up some of the things in terms of like the placements. Okay, so we're almost done, guys. We're almost at the end here. This video is way longer than I thought it would be, but you know, yap's got a yap, right? Last 2 things. Opaque Hourglass. No rank, no tier, because what am I going to compare it to, right? Opaque Hourglass, Arc High Impact. The perks that you want on this thing are Impulse, Firefly, or Field Prep. You could argue Field Prep should be higher than Impulse because it has a higher reload scaler than Impulse, but I think Impulse is generally more useful. You have Elemental Honing, Dragonfly, Firing Line. Technically, Vorpal should be on this list, but I'm going to assume, if you guys are not aware, I think everyone's been shouting it from the rooftops recently, but Vorpal is bugged on this weapon. You get both the primary bonus from it being a bow and the heavy bonus from it being a heavy weapon. So you get 1.1 times 1.2 for a 32% bonus to damage, which is basically between honing times 4 and times 5, except it requires 0 effort whatsoever. So Vorpal is technically the best, I would say, general perk on this bow for damage right now. But again, I think after the season is over or after they nerf Temporal Blast, this bow is going to see much less use, right? But I have no bows to compare it to, or heavy bows to compare it to. So it's just going to sit here on its own with Wind Retrograde as company in this other tier. But people were asking me, like, you know, what role do you recommend? Because not only do people use the spreadsheet as like a tier list, but they also use it for role recommendations as well. So yeah, I kind of put some roles in here. Maybe for ad clear could be kind of cool. You know, Firefly, Dragonfly. Definitely, I will say the tier 5, tier 4 system has incentivized using weapons for perk swappability, right? For example, you could run Firefly, Dragonfly during mechanics, or maybe field prep to generate more ammo, and then during damage you swap to honing or something like that, right? Definitely a thing that I mentioned on some of the other weapons here as well. Mint Retrograde, speaking of perk swapping, you could run Envious Arsenal Chain Reaction during damage for ammo generation, and then swap to Rewind Honing or Rewind Bait during damage, right? So another perk swap weapon, Mint Retrograde. I don't know. You guys know what perks to run on this thing. I think the only perk here that's like people aren't really going for is Hatchling, but I just put it there because it's like I could squash 3 perks into there. But yeah, you're really just going for Rewind, Envious, and then Bait, Honing, Chain, like everyone knows at this point. Problem Solver is good. Excellent ammo gen, bro. Okay, you guys know the drill. You guys know the drill. I don't need to tell you what to get on Mint Retrograde, but people wanted me to add it here. So people wanted me to put it in the tier list spreadsheet. So it's here. It's in the other tab. When we get more rocket pulses, like maybe like 3 or 4 of them, I'll start ranking them. But, you know, we only have 1 right now. So that's what you're going to get. Okay, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this video was a little, you know, I didn't have slides. I didn't script this thing. This was all kind of just off the dome, just yapping. I'll definitely try to edit it a little down in the post-production. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and be hyped for another video tomorrow. This video is going to come out kind of late today, but you know, it'll be out on time for, like, you know, the 1 video a day promise that I made to you guys a little while ago. So goodbye for now, and have a great day.